Hello and welcome to Can't Find My Way Home, the podcast where expats from around the globe talk about the music and art scene in their adopted home. I'm your host, Craig. In this episode of the podcast, I was joined by Chris Tharp. Chris is an American expat, originally from Seattle, and has been living in Busan, South Korea since 2004. We talk about what brought him to South Korea, obviously a plane, but the other stuff too, his past life as a revolutionary theatre artist, and the adventures of starting out in a new country from scratch. Moving to another continent to live and work, we hear how Chris was eager to adopt the trappings of a young traveller and to soak it all up, something akin to what Anthony Bourdain became known for. We talk a little about that too. We get into how Chris started blogging in the early years, writing for local magazines, getting into travel writing, and gradually building up a following in the days before social media really took over. He also gives us some good advice on what to do to gain exposure for your work. Alongside Brian Aylward, Chris was at the forefront of bringing stand-up to a group-orientated culture. He recounts how the stand-up comedy scene in South Korea, and Busan in particular, evolved over the years. We talk dodgy promoters, chasing your dinner around the plate, and why moving to South Korea is a bit like entering the witness protection program. Without further ado, Chris Tharp. Joining me today on Can't Find My Way Home is Chris Tharp.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Chris, today we're going to talk about a little bit about a lot of things, I think, but let's start off with your expat journey and how did it start for you?
I'm from the United States. I'm from Seattle, and I finished college in 1995. Yes, I'm that old. And I started a theater group in Seattle with, there's four of us from my college, and we started this kind of experimental avant-garde theater and comedy group. We did these crazy shows in rock clubs with bands, and then we do shows in theaters and featuring lots of blood and huge stunt spewing penises and, white trash characters and drag. It was kind of like a really methed out American Monty Python, I suppose. We were called Piece of Meat Theater, and we did pretty well in Seattle. We got kind of a nice cult following over the years, and we wrote all our own material. It was all original. And I also got involved doing improv comedy in 1993 for Unexpected Productions, which is the big improv comedy theater in Seattle and the biggest theater in the Northwest that does that. And that was a professional gig. I got paid for that, which was cool. And so I did that in Seattle and kind of living the life of a revolutionary theater artist. And but we decided, my group Piece of Meat, right at the end of 1999, we decided to go to LA to try to stake our claim, get our development deal.
And all that, eh?
Yeah, we wanted to, at the very least, sell some scripts because we wrote a lot of scripts. But the big goal was to get a deal as like a comedy show, on Comedy Central or whatever. And so we went down there and toiled away, and we did okay. We did a lot of shows, and we got some people came sniffing around from the industry and all that. But in the end, we weren't really TV ready, and I burned out on that. And went back to Seattle for a while, and then spent a few months in Chicago as a guitar player for an industrial band. And we toured the Midwest and the country. And then my buddy in the band who kind of lured me to Chicago had a nervous breakdown. And then I was back in my hometown with a girl, and that went south. And I was staying with my parents and working in a warehouse. And I just kind of reached a dead end in my creative life. And I was broke, 33 years old. And but when I was in Chicago, I'd spent the winter there alone because my buddy had, like I said, had his breakdown, and he just left me alone there. So I didn't know anybody. And Chicago was a cool city. I used to walk around, it's great architecture. It's one of the real American cities and the birthplace of the skyscraper and, Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and all that. So, but my mind was elsewhere. My mind was thinking internationally. So I would go to the Chicago Public Library and check out all the travel books I could. So I spent just hours and hours in this little sublet apartment I had, just reading travel books, being an armchair traveler, going to wherever, Europe and Africa and Asia. So I decided that I wanted to, that I needed to have a change, either go to grad school or somehow get out of the country for a while. So I was scouring ads on Craigslist back in my hometown of Olympia after Chicago. Yeah, and I saw an ad. It said, come teach English in South Korea. All you need is a bachelor's degree and a pulse. And so I had both. And I'd known a couple people that had come to Asia in the 90s, had come to Japan and also Korea. And so I knew that this was a possibility kind of in the back of my mind that, I could maybe go work in Asia for a little bit. They'll pay you some money. I sent in my resume to this recruiter, and 3 days later I was on the phone interviewing, and they hired me the next day. And then 2 weeks later I was on a plane to Korea, and I landed in Busan, and it was in the middle of the summer, and I had a place next to the beach, and the whole country of Korea parties, basically in Haeundae Beach in Busan in the summer. So it was, bars are popping and everything's going off. I got a brand new set of friends, got a girlfriend the first week. I started working with this little language academy, but it was like funded by a big corporation. So they had money and they paid us on time. I had this little studio apartment, I was teaching kids. It wasn't like loading trucks. It was long hours, but it was, I'm just singing songs and reading books, didn't feel like work to me. I was like, fuck yeah, I like it here. And I think I'll stay for a while. And then, I got a job at a university the next year, like right away, kind of as a fluke, just lucked into it. I've been here ever since and started writing, started a blog like my first 2 weeks in the country, which led to other things. And here I am 15 years later, almost 16 years later, actually, married, still teaching at a university and writing and having a good time. So that's how it all started.
So during that whole period of time, you've seen all the changes then going from, this would be after the World Cup. So it was 2004 you arrived in South Korea?
Yeah, I came here Korea was still in a bit of the glow of the World Cup, but I wasn't here for that. 2004, kind of any anti-Americanism seemed to have calmed down. I'd heard about it, but I certainly didn't see anything overt, maybe I didn't speak any Korean at the time, so maybe people said things behind my back, but
you're just like, yeah, fine, it's not a problem, right? You're like, cool, yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I moved to Korea I knew about the Korean War pretty well. I'd read up on that, and of course I'd watched MASH, which was 11 years in the Korean War. Did you know MASH, the show?
Yeah, of course.
Did you ever get it?
Alan Alda and whoever else, I forget who else is in it.
Loretta Swit.
Suicide is painless, right?
Yeah, but I didn't really know much about the song Suicide is Painless, and based on the Altman movie. But Korean culture I didn't really know much about, other than it was kind of a little bit like Japanese, but they hated the Japanese, and I didn't speak any of the language. Like, I stepped off the plane without a single word. I couldn't say annyeonghaseyo, I couldn't kamsahamnida. I mean, like, literally a blank slate, a baby, when I walked off the plane here.
And then you get to deal with the chopsticks, right? So, the metal chopsticks.
Yeah, because I thought I was, chopsticks no problem, because I'd use the little light, wooden ones, and then these metal chopsticks are 10 times as heavy.
go chase your dinner, right? That's basically what they tell you. We'll take you for dinner, but the deal is we'll laugh at you chasing it around the plate,
Yeah, it was tough. It took a little getting used to, but I mean, sometimes you get the fork, and even like about once a year I'll still get the fork, and I get kind of offended by it. It's like a microaggression. I'm sitting there eating, and I just go down to eat, and then silently they just place a fork by me, like my wife or any Koreans I'm with. You don't give them the fork. You give me the fork. I feel like Larry David having a meltdown.
Yeah, I kind of miss that actually from time to time. I don't get that here in Germany, right? No fork, nothing. No. You don't get a smile, nothing. It's just like here,
No.
Just deal with it. Mm. How about your background then? So when you landed in Busan, what did you think about, the things that you'd done in the past with your theatre background and your performing background? Were you really bummed out in the sense that you didn't want to do anything else with it when you landed? Just start again and then see what, gradually build it up again? Or were you quite open to new things?
Yeah, I definitely had burned out on performance. I mean, I had done so much of it in the 90s. It's, every weekend with the improv group and Piece of Meat, we were just writing and doing it all the time. So when I got here, it was kind of nice not being known for that and not having to do it. For a year, I just taught English and drank a lot of beer and ran around and, and got a motorcycle. I was very eager to sort of adopt the trappings of this eager young traveler and to soak it all up and to eat all the crazy food. And it's kind of funny because obviously, the person who came to really sort of embody this is Anthony Bourdain. But I was kind of familiar with Bourdain. I didn't read his book, Kitchen Confidential, but there was one thing that he kind of inspired me. And I was back living in LA before I'd come to Korea, and I was watching, it was the first TV thing he had ever done. And he was in Cambodia with his French buddy, the other chef, and they were touring around Cambodia just eating all the crazy food with the camera in tow. And they were on a Tonle Sap Lake, the big lake there, on a boat, and they just roll up to this houseboat, and there's a woman on the houseboat, and I've been in this houseboat village since, and she's just there frying up a pan full of fish, like from the lake, and with peppers and onions and garlic, and they just roll up and they're like, hey, can we eat some of your food? And she's in the camera and Tom, they probably said, here, we'll give you a little money. Of course, you're going to be on camera. And she's sure. And they just sat there and they're eating this food on this houseboat in this lake in Cambodia. And to me, it was one of the most punk rock things I'd ever seen, because, I had grown up with such a fear of getting sick from foreign food. And, in the state, it was just so removed and kind of taboo. Oh, you'd never do that. And these guys are like, yeah, it's no problem. We're going to go. The worst that's going to happen is maybe we get some diarrhea. And so I remember watching this episode, and they go to the markets in Phnom Penh and they're eating all sorts of crazy stuff. And I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to go somewhere nuts, somewhere far away, and just kind of drink it all in. And so when I came to Busan, that was kind of in the back of my mind. So I was fine not doing plays or performing, even though I started doing some of that later on. I was more than happy just to kind of be here. And
just go and explore some new things, yeah?
Yeah, it was all new to me. Everything was new. The language, the food. It was the most excited I'd ever been in my life that first year. It was just, it blew my mind. And every day, I don't know, maybe the dopamine levels that shoots off. Oh, wow, look at this. And, and I would eat, my second day in the country, I went into a nachibokum place, which is the spicy octopus they do here, the little kind of medium-sized octopus. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just saw a little cute picture of an octopus in this market. I'm like, okay, that looks interesting. I walk in, and everybody's sitting at these tables with these pans of bubbling red sauce and octopus, and I just sat down and pointed to the guy next to me and said, give me that, and said, give me a beer. And it was August and 35 degrees, like 90 something degrees in American, and humid.
The humidity as well. You're just,
yeah. And sweat's pouring down my face, and I'm eating, and it's so spicy and so good. And I'm drinking this ice cold beer, and all the old ladies are peering out from behind the kitchen looking at me, because I think I was probably the first white guy to ever walk in the restaurant. They're laughing their asses off because I'm just pouring sweat. And that to me was the essence of it. I realized then, that was my second day in the country, that, wow, this is where I want to be right now.
And definitely not look back.
No, I didn't. I had reached a point in the States where I didn't want to be there anymore. Like, just, I was poor. I was a failure. I was a loser. There's this, the trope of the loser who couldn't hack it at home coming to teach English in Korea. And I will admit that was me to a degree. Now, I had tried to do some cool things, and I had succeeded, written a bunch of plays and performed, and I used to get recognized in Seattle as a performer, so I mean, for a while I felt kind of like hot shit, but in the end, it didn't mean anything. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. So when I came to Korea, I mean, I was at the end of my rope to a degree. I was looking for something new, and so I kind of felt like I'd entered the witness protection program. They gave me a bag with a brand new life,
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting place to do it. Yeah, they won't come looking for you there, in the back streets of Busan.
No, and it did allow me to reinvent myself, which was good.
What would you say the next step was when you really, maybe we talk about your writing. Let's focus on that first. You said you kind of started a blog pretty much the first couple of weeks when you arrived.
Yeah, my first week, I think it may have been just a couple days in. I think I remember my first entry, because blogs were kind of new at this time too. I guess in the late 90s, they started, I'm like, what's a blog? I don't know what that is. Because I had started doing this kind of writing in the States. Like when I went on tour with the band, I was just doing kind of writing about all the towns we went through in the cities, and like kind of
journal, right? Literally just writing down.
Yeah. Yeah, but also like for an audience, as kind of because as a performer, I tried to bring that to my writing. I'm like, okay, let's make this entertaining. Yeah. And so I did these, we'd be in like Pittsburgh or New York City or Jacksonville, Florida. And often these were terrible places that I would just make fun of. And so I did these missives and sent them out as group emails, And then when I got here, somebody said, well, you could just do blogs. There's a thing called a blog you could do. And I'm like, oh, cool. So I started doing that on LiveJournal, which is a blog platform, and also it also was kind of a proto social media platform. You could friend other people, and you had a kind of a handle and an avatar. So it was like a pre sort of Facebook sort of thing, but you also blogged. So I started writing about Korea, just my life here, and everything I could. And also, I would just drink and get confessional, and I would make fun of things. And over the year, it kind of began to grow. I got, it never was like huge, but I definitely had a cult following. I had a loyal group of readers, friends, and family. And then a lot of people this was before Facebook and before there was a lot of information, people who wanted to come to Korea and teach, they would Google that, and maybe my blog would come up. So I started getting readers based on that.
They're definitely getting a bit more of a real life perspective than the Hagwon owner kind of semi-corporate answers. You're getting a bit more insightful and a bit more real what it's really.
Yeah, and also my blog, I had a kind of really raw, honest sort of style. That's kind of how I like to write. I tried to make it funny. And it was kind of dark and snarky and sarcastic. So there were pretty much everybody from the early 2000s who moved to Korea, 9 out of 10 had some kind of blog, but most of them tended to be these kind of starry-eyed, oh, I went to a temple and it was amazing. We went on we went to a rice cake factory, and Korea has the rice cake. They were often these.
It was a bit too twee.
Yeah, like maybe these, like a 23-year-old dopey Canadian girl who just got here for the first time and everything's wonderful, and and mine was a little more caustic and raw, and I think some people like that. Other people just thought it was the ramblings of an alcoholic.
And what was the next step for your writing then? So it was the LiveJournal things, and then how did that build up? Were you getting, did anyone pick up your work, or was there other mediums that came into play with the advent of Facebook?
Yeah, I guess, this is Facebook. I didn't get on Facebook till about 2008. I think Facebook kind of landed in 2007. So this is 2004. I was doing LiveJournal, and then, at some point, a guy named Bobby McGill, who used to be a journalist in the States, he was teaching here as well. He used to live in my building. He started a magazine in Busan called Busan Haps. First, it was just a little pamphlet of what to do, where to get a burger, or, kind of a general information. He envisioned it as kind of a glorified airline magazine. But that kind of got bigger and more professional. And I was in the first issue of that. And he gave me a column. I had a column called Tharp On. My last name's Tharp. And I would just write about I'd write about drinking, or I'd write about the seasons, or, or food. I had a column, and it was a humor column. So I guess that might've been my first thing. And then I started submitting some pieces. I did a couple of pieces for Matador Network, which is a travel website that does kind of short form pieces, but they'd pay you $25, which wasn't much, but at least you could get paid, and it was kind of professional looking, and you get thousands of hits. Then I got picked up by a website in the States called Monkey Goggles that also did kind of humorous essays, and they paid me a little bit. So suddenly I'm kind of getting these little pops. And then I guess the biggest step from that was, there was a guy who was living here who was a writer who he had published several books, and he was my LiveJournal friend. Yeah, he had like 2 or 3 books under his belt, mainly in the genre of gay erotica. He's a gay guy, but he was like well known in that field. But he'd also done short stories and more straight lit. And he moved to Hong Kong, and he started an independent press. And he contacted me right when he was starting the press. And based off those first 2 years of blogs, he said, why don't you take some of those and also expand on it and do a Korea book, do a memoir about your life in Korea with information for people who want to live there, and also so I did that, and that was published in, I think it was published in 2011, I guess. Yeah, maybe, has it been that long ago? Yeah, it was. But it was several years in the writing. And also by that time, my father had died and my mother had died within a year. of each other. My parents were in poor health when I moved here, and then their health just slipped and they both died within the course of a year. So I had to deal with that, which ended up being kind of the core of the book, which, I mean, I guess it gave the book a little more gravitas than just some expat drinking his way around Korea. You know, I had to deal with something serious. So he published the book. His company, Signal 8 Press, out of Hong Kong, and the book did pretty well. I mean, it wasn't huge. I think to date, it's still one of their best sellers because it was put out right at the time, maybe 2009, 2010, 2011. A lot of people were coming here. But in Busan, we were awash in teachers, and that's kind of what I call the high water mark. There were loads of musicians in town. There must have been like 10 different, like what you might call foreigner bars going, and they were just packed all the time. People were going out, they were partying. It was thumping really hard. So I think my book was timed pretty well because a lot of people, when they're coming over, they're like, oh, they look online, but I think a lot of people bought the book. We can read the book before coming to Korea. And so I would get people who come up to me in the bar, oh, you wrote that book? I'm like, yeah. Oh, dude. Got a few beers.
If nothing else, that's fair enough, I think. Getting paid in beer, bad thing.
Yeah, because I still never got that much money from it.
No, we never do, right? Well,
it's writing's tough to get paid for, dude. It's like the writer is. I mean, since the days of Hollywood, and especially now, with the kind of the death of publishing, nobody wants to fucking pay a writer, and that's eventually why I quit Busan Haps magazine. Because they were selling ad space and they started doing really well. They were selling, the Hilton and, Park High, all the hotels, and Lufthansa was taking full page ads. They had all the expat bars were buying ad space. So they had revenue every month. But, I kept saying, hey, you guys got to pay your writers. You got to pay us something. We're giving you content. Yeah, and they just they dragged their feet, well, no, we can't. And they just refused to pay their writers. They wouldn't do it. And finally, I told them to go fuck themselves, because if you're charging, it's like if I'm a performer at your theater and you're charging money for people to get in the door, and you've refused to pay me anything. It's just not right. And those guys, Bobby McGill, who was the editor-in-chief, and Jeff Leach, and even Michael Schneider, who was their business manager, who probably was the guy nixing my payment. I'm still friendly with all those guys. It's not any bad blood, but I had to, at one point, after years, I had to say, you guys, if you refuse to pay me, I'm not going to write for you anymore.
It's a point of principle, it's the old band adage as well, right? If you hire someone to play in your bar, then you got to look after them. It's like if you have a broken pipe in your bathroom, you're not going to just ask the plumber to turn up and sorry buddy, can you do me a favor? I'm a bit short this week, but we'll give you a
and I get when you're a young writer or you're just starting out, sometimes it's a bigger platform. I mean, the idea of never working for exposure, I mean, it's not that I would say never do that. If it's worth your while, I would say to younger writers, if it's really going to amplify your platform, do a few freebies. But years in and years out, for a magazine that's selling ads that refuses to pay you, well, that's
you're kind of taking the piss a little bit,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're having a laugh.
Moving on from that, what about the stand-up comedy scene? How did that all come about? I think the second episode or third episode. One of the early episodes I did of the podcast, I spoke with our friend Brian Aylward.
Oh, shit, yeah. Yeah, well, that's how it started with Brian. Well, I started before even Brian was here. I'll take credit. Brian.
You're going to steal it from him, okay.
Brian's one of my best friends in the world. No, I will give Brian credit for really starting the scene in Korea, but I was doing stand-up comedy in Korea before Brian even arrived here. I talk to Brian all the time. Just last week we talked for about 2 hours. He's living in Thailand. He was sitting in a pool drinking beer, laughing his ass off.
I think that was the last time I spoke to him as well. It was just before the lockdown, or maybe just started. But yeah, it was run about then. It was a while ago, but.
I came here in 2004, and so in Busan, there were still limited opportunities for any kind of performance. There was like one or two bands that were playing, and there was a couple clubs where they would play, and then it was like every Saturday there'd be the band, and there was like two of them. It was like a funk band, and then a really bad like alternative music cover band, but the funk band was really good. And there was like a Korean Beatles band that was pretty good. So you go there, the band would play, you drink a few beers, and then the DJ had come in, and then it was, you know, and it was sweaty dancing and girls and all that, which was fun. But there in Busan, I think it started in 2000. Before I came here, there was a thing called Poetry Plus, and they still do it sometimes. It's changed, but it was just a variety show. It's basically an open mic, and Ken May, who's the founder and still runs it, would open up. It was just an open performance. I think you had to come early and sign up or send a message if you wanted to perform. And they called it Poetry Plus. Originally, it was people reading poetry, and they're writing, and then some musicians would do things, and there was like interpretive dancers. It was very sort of, but everything sort of was on the very like arty side. You know, it was very precious. It tended to be very precious from what I knew. And so, yeah, so it's 2004, and I think it was November, and I'd come in maybe in August. So I'd been here a bit, and they did the first Poetry Plus since I had arrived. So I showed up that night, and I'm like, hey, I want to do some comedy, because I just started doing stand-up. In the States, I had done it in LA for a couple years. I'd done a lot of improv comedy and crazy theatrical comedy, but stand-up was something I hadn't done a lot of. But then when I went to LA for about 2 years, I did it there on the kind of the bottom feeder circuit. You know, I used to do shows at a laundromat. I mean, just cafes, all over the place. So I cut my teeth, and I got a set after a couple of years. But then I came to Korea, and there's no stand-up comedy here, but there was Poetry Plus. So I go up, and so that, you know, it's like people reading very serious poetry, and then, hey, ladies and gentlemen, here's some ha-ha yuck-yucks with Chris Tharp, and I get up there. And I'd written some very silly Korea-based jokes, and it did pretty well. People laughed. I'm like, yeah, okay. Had a pretty solid set. So then over the course of the next year, I went up a couple more times. I think a few months later, I went up, and I think I offended all these women, and because I was younger and like edgier at the time and kind of crossing lines that I probably shouldn't have crossed. I had some jokes that I would never do these days. And then I did another set that did really well. But then after about 3 times, no one else was doing comedy. It was still just me. So I hung up the comedy hat. You know, I was the only comedian in town. And I used to say doing comedy in Busan is like being the best cricket player in Tijuana. You know, it's like, there's no, there's no use. You're the only one. So I stopped doing stand-up, because if you're the only guy doing it, you need a scene for stand-up. You need some other fuckers doing it. So fast forward to, I don't know, 2009, 2008, right. 2009. I think at this time up in Seoul, they had a couple magazines. They had 10 magazine.
We had
and
Groove
what was the other
magazine.
One? Groove and 10. And I think it was Groove did an article on Brian. It's like, oh, stand-up comedy. And I'm like, what? They have an open mic, and I didn't even know about this. And so I read this article, and they interviewed this big, scary looking bald.
He is somewhat recognizable. Yeah, let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, it looks like a barbarian. Yeah. And that's what he used to say, like, I'm barbarian teacher, Brian. They used to do a thing in Haebangchon. Haebangchon? Is that what he said? Near Itaewon. Haebangchon. Okay, Haebangchon, which is the kind of neighborhood next to the base near Itaewon, which is now like the hipster sort of. But it was always kind of a cool neighborhood of cafes and bars, like away, just enough away from Itaewon to not be Itaewon. And they would do the Haebangchon festivals, I think twice a year. They do it in May and maybe October. And this was in May, and I think Brian put a thing out online. I don't know. I think it was in the article. He mentioned, if any comics want to perform, contact me. So I messaged him, I emailed him, and I said, hey, I'm a comic down in Busan, but I haven't been doing it because there's no comedians. You're doing comedy. And he's like, yeah, brother, come up. I'll give you 7 minutes. You got to be tight, man. Bring me your best shit. And so I get up there, and sure enough, Brian's in this hockey shirt, just sitting there hulking outside this club. And there's hundreds or thousands of people on the streets. And I brought a few of my buddies from Busan. And so the show, he had like 10 or 15 comics going for a few hours in this like hamburger joint where the windows were open outside, and there's people in the street sitting there, and it's loud and rowdy. And and I'm like, shit, this is gonna be a tough crowd just because it's raucous. So he puts me up a little late. So I go to the bar with my buddies, and I down a couple beers to get a little courage because I'm nervous. I haven't done it in a long time. I don't know any of these people. I'm up in Seoul. I'm in the big city. And so then he's like, hey, I'm from Busan. Chris Tharp, give it up. And so I get up there and, squeeze my way through the crowd. And it's, and I just start slamming. I mean, I'm just basically yelling on the mic. It's so loud. But my jokes just start landing. Boom, 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 boom. I just emptied the clip, and it was great. One of the best, my favorite sets ever. And it was exhilarating. And I just had the room, and it was rowdy. They're laughing. And then afterward, Brian's like, yeah, man. And we're drinking. He's like, you and me, we're doing stuff. And since then, we were friends. He started organizing shows with, it was just... Yeah, just like a couple months later, he's like, all right, let's do these comedy shows. So he would put himself as a headliner, like doing 30, 40 minutes. And there was a Scottish kid named Ross Gardner, really funny guy.
I know him, yeah.
Yeah, and but he was
not everyone in Scotland knows each other, though. I should
yeah, he's like, a little like elfin Glaswegian kid.
Yeah, he's very pale. He's the kind of guy that would get sunburn if a light bulb went on and all that, right?
Yeah, he's kind of this undercooked Scottish guy, and good-looking guy, but he was small and frail. But he would do these characters that were really funny. He'd do voices, he'd do Americans and Scottish and all sorts of stuff. And also he just had that really brash, sort of really cutting, like Frankie Boyle style, inspired Scottish sense of humor, which I love. And Brian loved it too. And so we did these shows at this wine bar, like. And Itaewon, and Brian like pimped it, like he pretended like we were professional comedians. Brian was a hustler, man. We were English teachers who had cut our teeth doing comedy, but he pretended that we were pros, and they had this huge poster out front with our face. They were charging like $35 a ticket. It was nuts. It was a money grab. And we did these shows.
That's one for the little guys then, right? That's
yeah, it was, and we packed the place, and they were, and I did okay. I think the jury was out. We did like a Friday night show. They didn't like me very much. The Saturday night show was better. But I remember Ross Gardner, like one night there was a bunch of like American military guys there, and not the young guys, but kind of older guys. But Ross Gardner used to do a whole bit of just slamming on GIs, He's like, you ever notice that GIs fuck the roughest girls in the world? And he's just talking, I wouldn't fuck a forest fire. Something like that. I mean, my bad Scottish accent, but he was, he was just slamming on American soldiers. I'm just shitting on him really bad. And during the set, one guy got up and took a swing at him. They had to eject him from the club. So what I did is I came back to Busan, and then I was planning on starting an open mic here to maybe cultivate some kind of a scene, but somebody else beat me to it. I said, somebody put an ad on the website here, which was called Korea Bridge. Hey, I want to start a comedy open mic. So I contacted him, and the two of us started one, and Brian came down, and then we had a couple people from Busan, and the first year it was pretty slow. It was just a handful of people. Sometimes we get a crowd, but usually it was pretty empty. But then we started getting more people and more people and more people. And by 3 years in, we had built this whole, there was 10 or 12 people regularly doing it. We'd always have new people. We were filling the place. We started taking it on the road, going to different cities, going up to Seoul, and they started developing their scene, and they'd come down here. And so suddenly we had this kind of, English language expat comedy scene going in two towns, and we would cross pollinate. And that went on for a long time until Brian left, and a few of the guys in Seoul, they ended up leaving. But most of the guys in Busan stayed, I mean, some people left, but the core of us who started that are still here because we all have university jobs and we don't want to leave.
And is the scene still going? I mean, maybe not in the last few months, and pandemics and one thing and another, but other than that, I mean, were you performing quite recently?
Yeah, we just did one just a little over a week ago. this Friday, not last Friday, but the Friday before, we had our show is called the Ha Ha Hole. It's the name of our group. And so, I haven't been doing it too much. I've been concentrating on writing, but I went out and performed to kind of help boost morale in this age of, disease. And it was cool. And they still do it in Seoul. But it's not as vibrant as it was, the expat scene, but it caught on with the Koreans. And now the Koreans have a Korean language comedy club that they, at least up until, again, Corona, were doing regular shows. My friend Danny Cho, who's a Korean American comedian, was a professional comedian. He used to come over from time to time. Yeah, he moved to Seoul and he was doing it professionally there, doing a lot of shows, doing some radio and TV stuff. So that's the kind of what the cool thing with comedy is. Whatever happens with the expat scene is that it's caught on a bit with Koreans, because before, the idea of stand-up comedy was a bit foreign to Koreans.
Yeah,
they
nothing
did
really
kind
like
of
it.
no, they do kind of silly challenges, a lot of slapstick and kind of funny group-oriented comedy. That's kind of the way, it's a group-oriented society. So it it's no surprise that their comedy tends to come from group dynamics. Usually they'll have a group of people doing something silly, and one guy is made to look really foolish in front of the group, and they all laugh at him. It's kind of this, you'll see it if you like shows like Muhan Dojun and Running Man, Il Baki Il, One Night, 2 Days, these challenge shows with these groups of people running around doing very silly things. Some of it slapstick, some of it just almost like improv games. But it usually would be kind of like, how can deliberately setting somebody up to fail in front of the group, which Koreans love. They just think that for them it's the most hilarious thing. But just somebody on a mic, maybe just doing commentary is not what they're used to here.
Slowly but surely, it's about just the drip effect, and then see how it goes. Maybe someone else will pick up the baton and run with it, and one of the
I hope so.
Koreans themselves.
Yeah. But I still don't know of any really real stand-up in Busan from the Koreans, only in Seoul. But Busan is still, it's 3.5 million people. It's a big, vibrant city, but culturally, it's just it's several steps behind the capital. Nothing really happens here until it happens there first.
Right. What about when you were when you took it out into the provinces, as it were? When you said with Brian, because when I spoke with Brian, this is what we talked about a little bit. I know Brian, one of his things was not so much the build it and they shall come, but he took it to them. He went to Daejeon and Daegu and Pohang and, well, you name it, Cheongju, whatever it was.
Gwangju,
Gwangju,
Pohang. We've done a lot of shows there because there's a Korean American guy who owns a bar there who loves comedy, and he's supported. Every time we have a road comic, we always stop there. He has a great setup. What's the other one? Mokpo, which is down in the southwest corner of the country.
Since I've been there, right?
Did a couple crazy shows there. Those were always, sometimes that could be really fun, and sometimes it was torture because, it depended on if whoever was promoting the show, how well they promoted it, because one of two things would happen. Sometimes you'd roll in, the good thing, which would happen is you'd come to Gwangju and you'd go to the Speakeasy Bar, which is a great little venue there. And there was an Irish guy who used to run that. And you'd walk into the bar that night of the show, and there'd be posters up. And people and everybody would be there for the show. Oh, they're excited. There's a comedy show. They never get comedy in Gwangju. And so you might have 60 or 70 people all there for the show. He's been promoting it, word of mouth. They're excited. They're there for the show, and you do the show and it goes off great. But the other thing that could happen is some guy, maybe there'd be a bar owner would say, sure, we'll have a comedy show. And he doesn't really know what that entails. He just knows that, I'll have a show and that's going to bring people in and I'll sell more drinks, but he doesn't promote it. And so you go in there and maybe even it's packed, but it's just people who, maybe it's their local bar that they just go to on a Friday night. It's just the punters.
Right.
And so you get up, hey guys, we're going to have a comedy show. And they're like, what? Who are these assholes coming to our bar trying to be funny when we're just here having a drink winding down on a Friday night. We didn't ask for you to come entertain us, and they get a chip on their shoulder,
Right.
and they resent you for
they need their private space almost, you know?
Yeah, and then if it's a big bar, maybe there's just a clump of like 15 people in the corner talking, and and suddenly you're trying to do, you're trying to punch a tsunami in the face. It's just this, this wall of sound. You're like, hey guys, how you doing? Hey, could you be quiet? We're having jokes. And no one gives a shit. They just ignore you. The bar owner doesn't care. He's not on your side. Or then sometimes we used to get this thing too where women often like comedy. Women like to have a laugh. I mean, if you go to any comedy club, it's going to be a lot of women, and that's why, like, comedians who do misogynistic, like, anti-women jokes are stupid, because so much of your crowd is going to be women, and you want them on your side. To alienate them off the bat is just dumb. So we would sometimes, like, I remember I went to where was it? Not Daegu, one of the towns north of there, Gumi, which is north of Daegu. And we've done a few shows there. And we went there with some of the guys from Seoul a few years back. And there were people there for the show, and there were people who weren't there for the show. But we had like 30 people there for the show, and a lot of women. And they were sitting up front trying to listen to the show. But then I saw in back, there's like 3 or 4 dudes just checking us out. Who are these guys coming? And now the women are like paying attention to them, and they actively and just giving us the shit eye all night at the bar, like.
It's straight out of Deliverance, right? Or you walk in the bar and the jukebox stops,
Yeah, I'm just like, ugh. Yeah. So I remember we finished our beers and got out of there because there was a couple of big guys just looking at us with hate. And, sorry, we just told jokes,
You're sorry about that.
Yeah, I know. Well, one of the guys was Canadian. He had to apologize. The headliner. I'm sorry, eh?
Yeah, leave it to him. You can follow Can't Find My Way Home on anchor.fm. Simply search for Can't Find My Way Home. On Instagram at can't.findmywayhome, on Facebook at Expat Music Pod, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast from, I'm pretty sure you'll find us there too. Until the next one, this is Craig saying cheers.